Welcome to Knife Thoughts. This video is going to be a first look overview of this knife, and as you can see, this is the traditional pocket knives Ohio River Jack. And more specifically, this is the re-release of the Ohio River Jack. So I have done videos on the previous run of the Ohio River Jack, which I got to check out several different versions of, and there were several different versions as there are with this new release. But there's a bunch of upgrades on this release that I want to talk about, as well as like what is available versus last time. So first of all, this is a knife for traditional pocket knives, Risner Cutlery. If you are not familiar, it's one of the best places for sure to get traditional pocket knives and really knives in general. Austin does a great job all around. You get to see, good videos of the knives, pictures of the knives, and he always has great service. And he has also added a lot of modern knives to his site recently, so good selection, and has been coming out with these exclusives, his own designs. And so I really love that. I love that he has such a passion for traditional pocket knives, thanks, I think in large part he would say from his grandfather, who got him into the business and the whole community. And I really appreciate that he is bringing these kind of modern slip joints to the market. So the Ohio River Jack is an interesting knife in the pattern that it is. Just real quick, it's an equal end jack. So you can see that both ends are the same size. They are really kind of square end. So you might say it's an equal square end jack, which is kind of different. On the original video, I called it an elephant toenail or a sunfish, and I do think that it is, probably towards those two kind of traditional patterns, but it's not exactly like those because those usually would have rounded ends, whereas this has these kind of beveled ends. So it's an interesting pattern that certainly takes a lot of cues from traditional patterns, vintage patterns, but is, modernized and has Austin's own spin on it. So I appreciate that, just like I do with the Jack Wolf knives and lots of other, modern slip joints that are coming out. But there's a couple different versions of this. So as you can see, I have the clip point version. They are also doing a sheep foot, a spear point, and a Wharncliffe. And so they're doing all single blades on this run, whereas on the previous run, there were also some two-bladed. And so this is one of the ones that I have kept. I've done giveaways for the rest of the other ones that I had. This one and this one are the two that I still carry and use. You can see that this is a two-blade, and it has the Wharncliffe and spear point. The other reason that I kept these two is because of the previous run, these are all three of the blade shapes. So there was a sheepfoot, spear point, and Wharncliffe. There was no clip point. And so that's actually why I went with the clip point this time, is because, I didn't have any experience with it. Now, all of the blade shapes are slightly redesigned. So I would say that the Wharncliffe is a, pointier Wharncliffe. Again, I haven't seen it in person, but judging from the pictures, it's pointier. Kind of the same deal with the spear point, and all three have more swedging. So, just some differences with the blade shapes themselves, but there's lots of other differences also. So a couple of those are, first of all, they are in S90V. So rather than the M390 of the previous run, this is in S90V. It's kind of interesting. I think that M390 must have kind of dried up overseas with the OEMs, because Jack Wolf Knives also switched from M390 to S90V. On the other hand, though, that's just certainly speculative, because that could just be kind of a market influence choice where people prefer S90V. I know I have really enjoyed the S90V on Jack Wolf Knives. I've gotten a lot of experience with it at this point, and so far this seems great also. I think it's a really good steel for a slip joint because it has great edge holding, reasonable corrosion resistance, and it's not the toughest steel out there, but you don't really have to worry about that much on a smaller knife. Now, I will say this, is a heftier knife than a lot of slip joints, but still I think S90V is a great choice. Now, these are also hollow ground. So I really like a hollow grind. I think that they have done a good job on this. It seems really pretty slicey, especially considering it is a stouter blade. So I do appreciate that. It's something that I, again, love on Jack Wolf knives. So this is just the first one that I grabbed. This is the second run of the Midnight Jack. Now, the grind on these Ohio River Jacks is not going to be as thin as on Jack Wolf knives, but that's intentional. So you can kind of see the difference in, maybe you can see the difference. Well, hopefully you can see the difference in the thickness kind of at the tip or behind the edge. And I think that that's intentional. I do think that this is intended as more of a harder use slip joint. Another difference is that these are belt satin. So it gives it a little bit of a nicer finish. I certainly don't have a problem with the more polished finish that was on the originals. Looks like I've got some stuff on here from the last time I used it. I don't have a problem with that, but I don't think that it has as premium a look as a belt satin. It just, looks a little bit, washed out compared to the belt satin. And again, from Jack Wolf knives, I'm pretty used to it, and it looks nice to me. So another kind of upgrade there on these. There's also new jimping. So these previous ones didn't have jimping, at least the ones that I still have don't, and there is jimping on this. Again, kind of another thing that insinuates to me that it is intended to be, really used. You can get a good purchase on that. And then finally, there's an improved sharpening choil. So sharpening choils are something that I, originally was not big on. It's just something that I didn't think was necessary, but I've come to be used to them. Again, a lot with Jack Wolf knives. They had pretty serious sharpening choils originally, and Ben has actually increased the size of the sharpening choil, so it's pretty pronounced. And this is not quite as pronounced as that. So I'll show you. Let's see. This is the Benny's clip that just came out pretty recently, and I suppose it's about this. It's the sharpening choil on the Ohio River Jack is wider, but not quite as deep as on the Jack Wolf knives. So definitely a more emphasized sharpening choil than on the original, which basically just had a cutout for the stop pin. It still does have the stop pin, and it sits in there, but it's, increased. It does make it so, it's a little bit easier to keep the shape of the blade as you sharpen it through use. You're not going to get into that kind of blending area of the plunge grind and get what is called a smile on the edge. That's not something I knew the term until, again, Jack Wolf knives, Ben uses it, but I think it is a nice upgrade. You know that your knife is going to keep looking the way you want it to through use. And again, I think that this is intended to be used. Another upgrade is the long pull. And this is one that I'm really happy to see, because on these originals, particularly on the two blade where you couldn't pinch it, these long pulls were a little bit kind of slippery. Now, it wasn't an issue, but every now and then, again, particularly on this two blade where you can't get your thumb behind it, my thumbnail every now and then, not a lot, but would slip out of there. So I appreciate that these are catchier, and they, are very tactily, is that a tactile? It is a tactile difference. You can feel the difference, and it makes it so even though this blade sits pretty deep in the frame, this clip point sits nice and deep there, you can still pinch it because you get a lot of purchase on that. So I do really appreciate that, and certainly you can get good purchase with your thumbnail. So I like that change a good bit. Now, like I said, this sits nice and deep within the frame. Mine is slightly off center towards the pal side, but certainly not touching, and no blade play. I also forgot to mention that it does have a rounded pivot screw, so Austin said it makes it easier to get at that. I definitely don't suggest taking this apart. You could adjust it, but I wouldn't take it apart. But then these screws are flat so that it kind of fits in with the titanium better. Now, they still have the jig titanium, which again, I kept the sheepfoot version. I really like the jig titanium. I have to say, I actually prefer the original flat screw at the pivot. I think it looks a little bit more like a traditional pocket knife because you don't have that screw opening there. That's just an aesthetic thing. It's not a practical thing. If you were going to adjust it, you would probably want to have the larger Torx and have it on both sides. But aesthetically, I do prefer this because it's just a little plainer. It looks a little bit more like a traditional pivot. But no big deal there. I like the jimping, or I'm sorry, not the jimping, the jigging. The jigging looks great, as it did on the previous model. You can see that it's, if not the same, then pretty much the same. It's the same across, each one of these also. At least it was on these. I asked Austin about that. But it's a great jigging pattern that Austin came up with. I think it looks really traditional and good. So I love the look of that. Now, as for the blade, I think that this is a great classic clip point. You got a nice drawn swedge there, nice, kind of clip. It really looks good. You've got straight edge, you've got some belly and a point. One thing, I think that this is just a design preference for Austin because some of the previous run had this, and it looks like possibly some of the other versions on this run do too, but it has somewhat of an upward cant of the blade. So hopefully you'll be able to kind of tell what I mean here, which is that the spine actually goes upward somewhat from the spring side of the handle here. It's not uncommon. It's not that that's something that you don't see on traditional knives. I actually packed up my Case Barlow for a hunting trip recently, or I would show you that those actually have that also, but it's not something I generally prefer, but I think that this still looks like a great clip point. So I think it's a really good looking knife, and certainly when you get it in your hand, it feels like a very substantial slip joint. It feels like something that you can do work with, really do some cutting. And I have been carrying this since I got it, and it's been great so far. Like I said, this is really kind of an overview video. I wanted to get at least something made before going on this trip, but I will continue to carry and use it and do a full review. But I think that this is going to be another winner for Austin at Traditional Pocket Knives. See Risner Cutlery. I really like the box that it comes in here. You can see kind of traditional style art of the Ohio River. And the Ohio River goes through Pittsburgh, which is actually what this is. So I really appreciate that because I work in Pittsburgh, or at least I did until very recently, and I went to school in Pittsburgh, and so it's really cool to see the buildings that I'm used to and all of that. So I don't know if it's this boat. This looks like more of an old-timey boat, but I actually almost worked on a boat on the Ohio River during college, I guess. So anyway, I really appreciate the art on this box. And again, Traditional Pocket Knives, see Risner Cutlery is great. Make sure you use my discount code if you decide to pick one of these up. I will have a link in the description as well as the code. That gets you a discount and also helps out the channel, so I really appreciate it when you use that. Also, make sure you check out knifethoughts.com and subscribe to the email newsletter there. Subscribe to the channel here, click the bell and select all so you know when I post new videos. And last but not least, as always, don't forget to go out and do good.